going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Long Box Sessions. I'm your host, Alex Dandino.
And I'm Josh Griffey.
I hope you guys are all having a wonderful week. Please make sure, we had some technical difficulties last week, but please make sure you listen to the episode we released last week, an interview with our friend Patrick Meany, who is a wonderful documentarian and filmmaker. He's made some really interesting comic books focused documentaries like about Image Comics, Neil Gaiman, Warren
I love
Ellis,
that Image Comics one. I watched that.
Oh, it's so good, right? Yeah. That's probably one of my favorite ones. He got some amazing plays. I think my favorite one is actually the Chris Claremont one because he has this master interview in it, which is Ann Nesenti, Louise Simonson, and Chris Claremont. And he told me that's apparently like the first time they've all been in the same room together since like the 70s. I was amazed. But it was a great interview. It was really nice talking to him. Please go listen to that. And, of course, as always, rate, review, subscribe, all that good shit. Griff.
Find us on YouTube, The Nerd Alchemist. That's plural with an S at the end. For all the good stuff and some new stuff coming up, guys. Find us there.
Indeed. Trailer reactions, all kinds of stuff. We're getting very savvy with this social.
Still trying. This might be the year D&D goes up on there.
Oh, boy.
My D&D game is getting hot. It's fucking hot in here.
I reiterate, Griff, how you doing?
You know, fucking surviving. Hey, it's the kind of week where you take pause and this was a good, hey, man, sometimes things get rough, but just take a moment and appreciate things. I'm trying to have that day as my mind tries to self-destruct and create mountains out of anthills, as it were. So, yeah, man, we're here.
Yesterday, recording this on a Monday yesterday, the tragic news, Kobe Bryant and his daughter were killed in this helicopter crash out in L.A., and it really recrystallizes one of those, man, I'm really lucky, and I feel glad that all these people that I love are in my life. So hug your loved ones, folks. Yeah. And your comics.
Especially once you're a dad and, you start bringing the kids. It was just whether you're a fan or not, it was like an unspeakable, tragic day.
It's terrible.
And it was so weird because I was sitting there that morning, right? And we woke up and we were having, coffee and shit. And I've been DVRing Pokemon for my kid. He's fucking Pokemon obsessed now, right?
Right.
Which is hilarious to me because I started playing Pokemon right when that came out on Game Boy. When the cards first came out, I was super into the collectible card game. I actually had more than one of those very valuable Charizards that my mom just gave away to kids at her church.
Right.
Still hurts to this day. I remember going to the theater when the movie first came out and punking kids stealing their cards. They had these free exclusive cards. And when we would get home from school, right, I was in high school and my brother was 7 years younger, so I would babysit them till my mom got home, and we would fucking watch Pokemon. That was our jam. And so that was a really big thing, and I've been a Pokemon fan for, I was looking back, I was like, man, it's been over 20 years. It's almost 30 seasons of TV and that many movies. They're still pumping this out all the time. My kid loves Pokemon Go. We're sitting there in the morning, and he's been watching the Alola League, or Aloha League, whatever the fuck it is. And we watched Ash finally win the championship. He became a Pokemon master.
Aww,
and
that's
fulfilled
great.
the promise of the pilot that I watched over 20 years ago with my kid brother. Wow. And I even put it on our Instagram. I got all fucking choked up, and I was like, man, this is a moment I will really cherish. Just watching this, with my 5-year-old, the way I watched it with my kid brother. And then that day is when the tragedy hit, and it just kind of recrystallized this. I had this good weekend of watching My Hero Academia and Pokemon and the Royal Rumble with my kid, just all this hanging out with him time.
Right.
And I think that's the nice thing about when you are kind of nerd culture or fandoms is you have these places to retreat when the world can get brutal.
Right.
And so yeah, I spent a lot of time doing that this weekend, man.
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nice. It's interesting you bring that up. I was actually thinking about, you suggested today, I listened to this pod, Imaginary Worlds, which is very short. It's about 15 minutes an episode, but it's very interesting. It's a lot like what we try to do here, which is examine mythology and that kind of stuff. But I like the way that it's approached, sort of deconstructing. The episode I'm on is about canon, which is really fascinating since they talk a lot about Star Trek. And again, I'm not a Trek person. I like Trek, but I'm not a Trekkie or Trekor or whatever.
Careful. I'm about to fucking shut this off.
whatever you're supposed to call yourself I've
been having to Mad Max train myself now that all these Picard weasels are coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah, it's definitely.
I had a name
pitch
for them
again.
that's no longer okay in today's more civilized society. I got to come up with a new name.
What was the original name?
I'm not going to say it. I'll get canceled for sure. But me and my Star Wars punk rock kids, we used to have a name we would call people that were next gen. They're like, the Borg would beat the shit out of anything in Star Wars. I was like, oh my God. We had a name for him. I won't say again.
Right.
But yeah, man, it's been a weird one. But what sparked in your mind for today's conversation?
Well,
I mean, worlds?
More important. Well, I was going mainly off something you said, which is yes, like imaginary worlds, retreating into these safer spaces, these things that you enjoy and love so much. That's something that I really latched onto, and which is why I would suggest they're 15-minute sessions, man. It's great.
Yeah.
Much shorter than this very long drab show, but nevertheless, it's still entertaining. But actually, it's funny. I did think about it. A couple weeks back, I had sent you a screenshot of this, and I actually put it on the Instagram for a poll today. But Rob Liefeld, the eminent Rob Liefeld, he of Deadpool fame, and who's a very major part of the Image documentary by Patrick Meany. He tweeted this out a couple of weeks ago. It was on January 6th, actually. He tweeted, "Comic books today are not in a resurgence of creativity. Most are endless talk fests, just cackling heads. Bronze Age through 99 is the sweet spot. Do yourself a favor and check out Marvel, DC, Image comics of those eras. Inspiring! !"
That's so fucking funny.
And I laughed because I sent it to you and I'm like, this fucking guy, man.
He
like,
said Golden Age? Is that what he said?
No, Bronze Age.
Okay, so he's talking like Stan Lee's resurgence, right?
No, he's talking like his stuff. Like, if we're being completely honest.
Stan Lee was silver, and then the 80s was bronze, right?
Yeah, like 80s is bronze up through modern age.
Right.
So, like, that's
because books like Watchmen and Dark Knight Return really didn't use a lot of words.
Well, that's like sort of the funny thing is like it's a fascinating thing to call like it's just like first off to say there's not a resurgence of creativity, which I think is like the weirdest thing to say about comic books. I feel like every year I find a book that I didn't even know could possibly exist, and it exists, you know? Like I think about every time I read that quote, because I've been reading it over and over again trying to come up with like an idea for a show. And I realized like the best thing is just like
is the tape from The Ring to you.
Well, honestly, like I was just like I feel like it's that Winston Churchill quote: "The only way to go through hell is to go through it," or the best way to go through hell is to just keep going. Like, because I was just like, I'm gonna have to just address it. Like, I think Rob Liefeld is like shockingly wrong, and also like I get that it's like part of his brand. Like he says he has a lot of hot takes. That's his thing.
Why the fuck does he still have a brand? Is he still making books?
I mean, he's making his thing. Like he did. I mean, again, I feel like his. I don't know
When's the last time you picked up a new Rob Liefeld book?
I don't think I've ever picked up a one, to be honest with you.
That's not like you weren't. What? So what are his big hits? Right, Deadpool. Was he in Wildstorm? Was that him?
No, Wildstorm's Jim Lee. I know this because I watched the doc though. No, he was like, I forget what his team was called. Wildcats was Jim Lee. I think he was like Blood. It wasn't Bloodsport.
I'm gonna pull up the
like
Wikipedia here so we can figure out.
Yeah, but either way, I think Rob Liefeld's a really interesting case of someone. Like first off, what great self promotion is that to just say, hey, fuck all the rest of those new comic books. Go check out the shit that I helped create during the 90s and 80s and up through today. Aren't I awesome? Like, yes, you with your 15-pack and gigantic Captain America packs. Yes, thank you.
X-Force. He was in X-Force.
He was like one of the big X-Men guys.
Right.
That was I think
Youngblood.
That's what it is. Youngblood.
Yeah, there you go.
But that was his like big Image book. But he was it was like him, Jim Lee, and Mark Silvestri were like the big X-Men artists at the time.
Okay, so make when they broke case to Image. Let's make a case piece by piece to refute Liefeld, right?
Okay, well let's just go line by line.
Should I be Liefeld? Should I be Liefeld? Should we do this like Keanu and Al Pacino in Devil's Advocate? Where I just start screaming in front of paintings and you go, whoa.
Yeah, that's fine.
No. Okay. So he's saying that we are not in a creative resurgence, right?
Comic books today are not in a resurgence of creativity. So, do you think that's true?
I think there's a.
I feel like that's a loaded statement. Regardless,
there's a myopic way to look at this, right? And
right.
Here's something I'll say. I am never. This kind of gets back to what you were saying. There's never a time when I go to the store and I don't see a title and a cover page that seems so fucking absurd that I pick it up, right?
Right.
Like, what's the book I just read recently? Murder Falcon, right?
Right.
Falcon, mullet, American flags, murder, fine, right?
It's perfect.
And there are a lot of books, and I'll get back to Murder Falcon because I'm not lumping it into this crowd. But there are a lot of books now that seem to be doing this kind of toy bin mashup, right? Let's just make the most absurd shit we can ever think of and do a tongue-in-cheek riff on a comic book, right?
Right.
I find that tiresome and loathsome at this point, right? I'm kind of over that book.
Yeah.
But what I think is if you have that kind of a, let's take something so fucking crazy that it could only exist in a comic, right? Like Murder Falcon. Murder Falcon actually, on the core, might be this, people find these mythological instruments, and when you strum it, you get a fucking giant mastodon or the Kraken or whatever the fuck, right? It's pretty crazy. But what that book is at its core is about a guy who was losing every single fucking thing that was important to him. Is the person he loves was being eaten alive by cancer. And his absolute fucking helplessness. And how that darkness wriggled throughout everything in his life, even his band, and he was this great guitar player, and caused him to start lashing out and destroying everything, right? Isolating himself to match the sorrow he felt. And to me, this is where I disagree with him on the creativity, right? What I think we're getting now in comics is much, I mean, he is right. Like, it's not the traditional kind of comic book. But something like, we're getting a lot more perspective books.
Yeah.
Like here, I just read Anya's Ghost, right? Mm-hmm. It's about a young girl in high school, and her POV is she is the child of a first-generation Russian immigrant, right? So her mom came right from Russia. Here's what I expect of you. Here's how you should behave in American high school. And how that affects her, right? She finds a bone and, it, becomes bonded to this ghost, whatever. But that book... When's the last time I was put in the perspective of a teenage girl with Russian parents? And so I think this is where I disagree with him, is he calls them endless talk fest, right? I think what it is comic books are now opening up to where we're getting more perspectives and more different worlds than ever before. And just because they're real worlds that we didn't know, I don't think that makes them less valid than fucking Midgard or whatever.
Well, Midgard's Earth.
Yeah, that's right. Midgard's Earth, just without the whole floating Kansas thing.
Well, I mean, I feel like to me, I mean, if I'm reading a little deeper, I feel like more to the point, what he's trying to say is comic books are not in a resurgence of creativity because they're not being as sought after. It's a great Image Comics that documentary is a great example of the frenzy that occurred in the 90s for what was happening.
Right.
What he's saying is you don't see anyone going off the rails for Image Comics again. I'm like, well, that's because it was new. That's a false equivalency. But
he's also totally wrong.
Oh, no, he's absolutely wrong.
But no, it's not even that, right? They're not pulling things off the shelf, but he's not taking into account a couple major factors, right? The way people get what they read has changed dramatically.
Right.
You're a big fan of the Marvel Unlimited app, and what I've said is I only do trades now. I can't follow 8 fucking cross-in books and do all this week to week, and then I just bury them in a box and I don't see them enough, and bags and boards. I'm past that. I'm fucking in my mid-30s. I want to trade on a bookshelf. I can pull out whenever I want. So this is changing how we're reading. And actually, Image has been on the forefront of, here's our first trade for $10, get a taste, and do this and that, right? But what you're seeing is our culture now is not about buying funny books at the spinner market at the grocery store. We are multimedia consumers now. And what dominates all of the multimedias? Comic book properties. Every comic book that has been optioned. So I would say there is a fucking frenzy for these stories.
Well, no, and I think that's what I was going to say. So,
Right.
I mean, like, that's essentially, yeah, I think it's a false equivalency to say, like, just because you don't have people walking around in, like, costumes of your characters at a Comic-Con, that's because they're in the middle of being L&D'd at, DreamWorks or ILM to become major motion picture characters. Like, that's, like, the whole point of this entire thing is, like, what you're doing is upstreaming your media. Like, Deadpool's a great example. Deadpool is an invention of Rob Liefeld, the thing he's probably most famous for.
Right.
Deadpool was almost, I mean, people forget this. Deadpool was a pretty much non-starter for a long time. Like, that, Ryan Reynolds and Tim Miller leaking that test reel online was probably the only reason that shit became an actual movie franchise. It is the only reason. Because everyone saw, oh, that actually could work in a movie format rather than just being like some weird wink at the fourth wall camera guy, comic book guy.
Right.
So now when you translate it and make it work in the real world, I'm like, oh, yeah, well, let's make a movie about it, I guess. Like, that, I think, is the problem is, like, the false equivalency is that I feel like he's saying that resurgence of creativity and endless talk fest is somehow not the medium he's going for. I'm like, I think that what he's saying is, like, it's not easily translatable into just like a giant blow 'em up movie. There's a very different, but that's the benefit of comics. Like, comics is a different language altogether. And it's interesting that a guy who built his career in comics has a problem with something that is kind of just like a relative norm, I think, in a lot of books. Like, I think about, like, but more to the point, I think about a book that doesn't have almost any dialogue, like Shabu. Like, that book we read, the Lighthouse, I can't remember what the book's called off the top of my head right
Alone.
now. Alone, thank you. Like, that book has virtually no dialogue in it at all. Like, almost, like, the main character never says a word. It's an entire book told from, like, and it's framed meticulously. It's paced meticulously. It speaks to the credit of the medium itself. So to say that there's an endless talk fest and also not a resurgence of creativity is, well, obviously wrong, but also just means that you're not reading the right. I think if you're worried and you're uncomfortable with the amount of creativity that's not around, I think you're reading the wrong books. I also would say read an image book. Like, God Country is a great example. God Country, to me, is an amazing book with amazing relevance for it to be about a guy who literally picks up a sword, a guy who's suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's and picks up a sword and becomes a fucking hero, essentially a hero god.
Right,
like,
but I don't think that's the book he's taking shots at.
It's not the book he's taking shots at.
Right,
but
I think he's taking shots at books like Bloom, things like, these stories about, God, fucking, what is that book? I just read a book about a couple or a young teenage guy, and he's like with his family, and they run a bakery, and they have they pick up a guy who's a college student who's like in town for the summer, and he bakes. They pick him up, and this little like romance blooms, right? It's very Call Me by Your Name kind of thing,
right?
And it's one of those. There's not a lot of action. It's talking, but it's, to me, this is what I don't understand about his critique is, just to continue doing the teams of giant muscle people punching things, to me, is the uncreative outlet.
Yeah, I would agree.
To take me to the place where, oh, look at this, again, hardworking father, immigrant, here's a gay son, here's some college guy, they fall in love over baking. And the book has these just like really lovely visual montage pages of like what it takes to bake something.
Right.
To me, that activates a lot of the creative nodes in my mind because that's not where my head is, right? I live in the place of, like My Hero Academia I've been watching. All Might is where my brain always exists, right? I have the power and I'll fucking use it to defend people and punch holes in things.
Right.
That's where everyone's brain lives. And so I think it's just nonsense to say that things aren't creative because we're getting a lot more memoir books, I guess is how I would phrase it, right?
Sure. I mean, like,
I don't think that lacks creativity.
No, I don't think it is either. I mean, I actually think it takes more creativity to make a comic book memoir compelling, because there's a lot of things about a memoir that, like, when I read someone's personal account of their life, like, I'm reading that for my own. I'm reading that not expecting anything. Like I have to do all the work myself. To look at something like that and say like, oh, I have a visual component now. Like Day Tripper's a great example. I would say Day Tripper's one of my favorite books. I've talked about it on the show a lot, but Day Tripper's a great example of what I think probably Liefeld's complaining about, which is talk fest, but there is like this fantasy element to it. It's this magical realism. But I think that at the end of the day, what it's saying is something that isn't resolute, like, oh, there's 5 big muscle-bound dudes and they beat the bad guy. Like, there's not a resolution that I think is ongoing. It's simply a finite amount of story to be told. And not only that, it's a finite amount of story to be told that ends in a way that you will need to kind of do a little bit of work for. It's something we talk about a lot on the show when it comes to reading in general, is like, I don't want books to do all the work for me. I want to access that on my own. I think that Jeff Lemire is a great example of this. Jeff Lemire is a writer who I think whenever I get to just read a Jeff Lemire book, and I know he's one of your favorites, I am doing a lot of the work as well. Black Hammer, I think, is a great example of a book that absolutely could fall into the white noise of the pastiche on the Justice League or comic books in general or the Avengers, but it has such resonance with taking that concept and taking those little pieces of characters and taking it one step further into, like, really when you think about it, the tragedy of Shazam is what if one day he called on the wizard to change him back and he couldn't change back. Right. And he was stuck. Like that's something I wouldn't have thought about. But that's like those little things, those little points of access that you have for certain characters. That's what makes it compelling. I'm fine with talking as long as I'm learning something.
But again, I think it's so much more point. Like, I think Jeff Lemire would probably like Black Hammer, right? Because it feels like what he likes, which is super people, you know?
Right.
I think that's what he's saying is that now that we're moving out of super people world, and the way I would look at it is, so let's say comic books as an analog to films, right? Is a Quentin Tarantino movie less creative than a Michael Bay movie? And I would argue no. I don't think it's about.
But I think that's you can't. I don't think there's an equivalency to those either. Like the same thing I feel about comics, though. Like in any sense, one is not more. Saying one's more creative than the other is like saying like that apple is as good as that smaller apple. It doesn't.
And what
really
I'm saying is
matter.
that Rob Liefeld is deciphering out what he likes and saying the way he reads a comic book is creative, and the way other people want to read them is not.
Right. Well, I
think that's the crazy thing. If you look at visual mediums, right?
Right.
And even Rob Liefeld, I would say you could make a pretty good argument that his visual storytelling is a lot weaker than he imagines. Yes. Right? And that's what there are moments, right, like in a Tarantino movie versus a Michael Bay movie. And I like both those guys, right? Yeah. But I don't think the story always happens in the big explosive moment. I think the story happens in those small in-between moments. And I think that's what he's missing is some of these smaller stories can have enormously devastating panels where nothing's happened. Maybe just a line is spoken, right? Two people having a conversation can be as devastating in a comic book as, watching Metropolis get fucking leveled again.
Right.
And I think that's where I call bullshit on a lot of his stuff is I think this is something that a lot of us are facing too, is where moving forward as comic book fans is what is a comic book is changing, right? Like, we both lived in Hollywood, and it became a thing where people would send me, because I used to do screenplay notes all the time for people. They'd send me this thing and say, hey, no one wanted this as a movie. I'm going to make it a comic book now. Yeah. And that's just the reality of what's happening, right? A lot of these memoirs and stuff in the day would have been focused as movies. But now people have access. Comic books have become a better entry medium than anything else. So you're going to start getting more and more different and disparate kinds of stories told.
I mean, I think that's the benefit of that's the benefit of the medium itself. Like, that's the best part of comic books is the width of stories is the same as film. Like, you can go read like, Klaus and Robert Crumb. Like, you can read like an underground book, like that kind of shit. And that's the same thing as like going to see a John Waters movie, basically. Like, going to see a midnight screening, going to your 3 screen and checking those movies out. And then you can go read, a Rob Liefeld book, which is pretty much akin to watching a Michael Bay movie. Not that it's bad. Michael Bay is a fun filmmaker. I don't have a problem with Michael Bay movies, but
exceptional filmmaker, yes.
You also have to know that, maybe you're not going to get the same intellectual stimulation as you might get from like a Tarantino joint, which arguably I would say probably isn't the case anymore, but that's neither here nor there, and that's for a different podcast. But nevertheless, like when I go, like Marvel Unlimited's the reason I like Marvel Unlimited is because I can like flip through very easily, like books that I might not have might not find at the bookstore anymore simply because they're older, but also because I just like seeing, I get grabbed by covers. So I'm going to check out a book from the cover, that's the same way I do when I go into the store. So what I like about the Marvel Unlimited app is when I read those books, I'm actually looking forward to the next issue, which is weird. And I agree. I like trades too. But at the same time, when I flip through and see older books, they're not nearly as grabbing to me as like books now are. Like covers for comic books now are like a big deal. Like, I'm not sure if anybody realizes that, but like the covers have just changed so significantly from like even like the 90s to the 2000s. It's just a different vibe altogether. I don't know. I went off on a tangent. I'm not really sure what I was trying to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the thing, though, and I think what you're stumbling on is the kind of chasm that we'll all find ourselves in.
Right.
And this happens, so much of the news is things are changing and we don't like it. And Rob Liefeld, by hook or crook, is becoming the kind of banner person for that movement, man.
Right.
In the way we imbibe comic books, the way we find comics, the way we read them, the way they're going to be presented, the kind of ways they're going to seep into other forms of media. Comic books now are going to be bigger than they've ever been. And the problem is that now comics aren't just their own holy thing, right? Like we used to go to a store and it was our place and we were safe, right? It's like the way when you go, like if there are people still going to Creed concerts, like they're Creed people. And it's ours, and no one else wants it, but it's ours, right? Like, that doesn't exist anymore for us as comic people. Like, there are people who go to you see this all the time, like, we go to watch Marvel movies, and we're going to have our hot takes about the character of Ant-Man, and they're fighting with some guy who's like, I had Ant-Man fucking issue 2 through 5, and, comic graded 9.8. It's like, doesn't matter. You're arguing two different things. Right. And this is where we are. But the core of what he's saying is the lack of creativity is the thing I keep coming back to, right? And I don't know how you I think this is the problem too. When you open the floodgates and there are more comics being made than ever, inevitably some stuff is going to get through the filters that is not top notch.
I would say this. The core of actually what he's saying is go read the comic books I drew from the 90s. That's really the core of what he's saying.
Sure.
But what you can glean from it is simply that what you were saying, which is that his issue with like talking characters and so on and so forth is, I think, like it's kind of a useless critique because there's plenty of action within the panels still, and there's plenty of work to be done. Like, I mean, I would think, like, off the top of my head, the books that I would say probably fall in the category of like non-Liefeld books in this case would be like, I would think this newer run of Batman, like probably the Tom King and Scott Snyder run of Batman are a little too talky for his taste. I think pretty much all of Tom King's work he probably doesn't like. Charles Soleil's stuff is very heady and not very action oriented. Like there's a lot of, I mean, I would even argue that like Grant Morrison's new X-Men run is probably not one of his favorite because it's a little more heady. Sure. It's a little less action oriented. And that's really kind of like, to me, what's getting to the heart of the crux of the problem. But I think you're right. Like there's an influx of comics out right now. There's an influx of companies that are making comics. Like I think about the smaller press stuff like Fanbase, TKO, like people who are putting out other kinds of books. Like eventually, yes, some things are going to, I don't know, float to the top that maybe aren't your style. But again, While we say like, I don't like that, it could be someone else's just total thing, man. I can't critique comics. Like I can critique comics in the way that I critique them, which is like, I didn't enjoy that. But
that's the fucking nonsense of this, right? It's like it's the same thing when you open Netflix. 80% of what Netflix makes offends my sensibilities, and I would never click on it. Right. It's not fucking for me. And this is something comic book people and fandoms have got to fucking move on from, right?
Yeah.
It's not all for you, man. It's like the commenter fucking mentality has taken over our universe. Like, remember in the day when you didn't like something and you just said, fuck this, and left?
Yeah.
Right? Like, we make content. My job is making content for a larger YouTube channel. And I'm never amazed at the people who stop and take time out of their day just to tell us to, like, fuck off and suck it. And you're like, that's become its own kind of game, right? Its own entertainment.
Well, it's its own genre itself.
Liefeld, he is fucking out of hand dismissing, not... I think the way, like, here's a book example. The way they use, like, look at these 3 pages. This could have been done in a different way, right? That's the Rob Liefeld I want to hear from, right? The elder statesman who made a big splash in the industry, helping people understand the art form, you know? Right. Help them fucking understand the art form as you see it. And they might not agree. But that's an interesting conversation. To out of hand say... anything that doesn't have enough action is not creative. You are completely invalidating someone else's art. And again, this is all fucking changing. The fucking Rob Liefelds of the world who want to stand their ground and make a proclamation like that, you're already beneath the wheel of change. Like, you're already fucking run over, right? Like, it's already happened. Because there's no better entry medium for a storyteller, in my fucking very humble opinion, than comic books. Because as you said, the amount of story and the genre of story you can tell, limitless. The amount of characters, limitless. The voice doesn't have to be intrusive to the visuals, right? Which is not the case with voiceover in films even. Films are expensive, man. If an actor fucking gets a haircut or shits out on you 2 weeks into your shoot, you lose everything.
Yeah.
Comic books, I think, are finally being appreciated as more than the place where guys in pajamas punch things. People have found that this is a just narrative fountain of opportunity.
Absolutely.
And I think to say that fact that we're going to start seeing them used differently and changing for more younger, hungry people to tell their more personal, different, widely spread out stories, to say that that's going to lead to a fucking... drought of creativity. I mean, that just sounds like a Clint Eastwood movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, he sounds like he sounds like fucking, Liefeld Torino. Like, it's just the same. Right. It's just this pathetic yelp into the void of, like, how could anyone like anything that's telling me something I didn't already know. You bring up an interesting point, though. It came up on Twitter last week. Declan Shelby, who's a writer, he did Wicked and Divine, and he's done a lot of Marvel books. He actually posted this thing. He wrote a page of a Superman story. It's just one page, and he gave it to 40 artists who are just 40 different artists. And the range of interpretations of that page alone should tell you that creativity is not just it's not a resurgence. Creativity is always happening in this field. Like, there's always creative people making stuff, making new things happen, making all kinds of interesting books and interesting plays. Like, I would implore anyone, go on Twitter, find it somewhere on the internet, but just honestly Google Declan Shelby Superman and it probably will come up. Mm-hmm. It's a really, really interesting look at how 40 different artists can look at pretty clear instructions, like very clear instructions, some give of like a page and panel by panel instruction and their interpretation of the work. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing stuff. Like I was floored by some of the interpretations. But that's like the beauty of comics, and that's why I think Rob Liefeld is 1,000% wrong in saying that there's. I mean, I'll say this: he's right that there's not a resurgence in creativity. It's always there at at the peak level the whole time. There is no resurgence. It's constantly going.
Yeah, he's kind of like one of the fucking ghost ship ghosts. Like, he already drowned by the fucking resurgent wave, and now he's just sitting here fucking banging on the walls like, remember! It's like, yeah, you're already ghost shifted, dude.
I don't draw feet! Yeah. I don't draw feet!
Yeah, it's... I actually imagine, that'd be great if there was a Rob Liefeld documentary, and they just started with that image of the ship with the hot pink, like, Miami Vice title card for Ghost Ship. Google that. That'll blow your mind that's the actual title font and color for Ghost Ship. But yeah, I don't know. And it's hard because when I was younger, I was much more into gatekeeping and protective of shit.
Yeah.
I mean, this show's been going on for a couple years now. I bet even if you went back to our early shows, you'd hear me fucking staking claims like, this is what it's gotta be. Totally. And as you get older, man, it's like all I find myself craving in comics. And it's hard because I still buy a lot of fucking comic books. My library is massive, right?
Right.
All I'm ever seeking is I want to leave with a thought or a fucking big feel. That's all I ever want. I don't ever need another Batman story in my life. But if you can give me Batman and it fucking gives me one new thought or that heart moment, that's all I need. And so these new books, right? Like I said, that, Anya's Ghost, a couple of the other new ones I'm reading, it's just those little moments, right? Like that girl's just her insecurities and how insanely close it felt to my high school life while adding all of the different things that she's going through based on her home life. I was like, that alone was interesting to me, right? That gave me big feels, and I thought it was that's all I need at this point as a comic reader. Yeah. Right? Like once you hit a certain age, and Rob Liefeld's older than we fucking are. Once you hit a certain age, like you've read the stories. And I mean, you're a writer, I'm a writer, we all know. You can boil everything down. There's, only a handful of stories, period.
Right.
So we're all just putting, whatever little bits of ourselves we can in them to change them just enough. Right? We're like the Taco Bell fucking engineers, right? All right, we got 4 pounds of fucking, cow testicle meat. We got this vat of liquid cheese, and we got 8 tortillas. How do we make them pay for this in a different way? That's what comic books are. That's what all art is, really. Is like we have the exact same shit as everyone else, but how, when you put it through the colander of our mind, can it be just different enough that, through alchemy, the fucking result is explosive. And yeah, to me, man, the more people that are in the party, we're just going to get there. We're just going to get there.
It's going to happen one way or another. I would implore anyone to go out and read whatever you want.
All right, so here, do this with me. If Rob Liefeld's full of shit, right? Yes. Let's do a quick, just to wrap this up. We got time. Just rattle off like 4 or 5 books and give me like the one sentence of why you find it creative and interesting. Okay. Like, what are you reading right now? What are things you've been picking up lately, even if they're old?
I've been reading, the Silver Surfer Black came out.
Silver Surfer Black was dope.
Which is really interesting. Again, Donny Cates is such a fascinating writer, and Trad Moore is just... I mean, the fact that Trad Moore has not done more than just, like, Luther Strode and, like, covers is shocking to me.
Okay, so that's one.
That's one. I would say the next thing I've been reading is the Chip Zdarsky Spider-Man book, the Spider-Man Life Story, which is really interesting because it's literally Spider-Man chronologically through the years, like, getting older and shit. Mm-hmm. Kind of fascinating. I'm not sure I really like it as much as I thought I would, but it's still worth reading. It's interesting.
Right.
I read a book called Observable, which is a Israeli book that one of my friends brought back for me from Israel, which is literally just about this guy's daily life. But it starts with him literally trying to lie about going on vacation so he doesn't have to hang out with anybody he lives with. It's very Curb Your Enthusiasm, actually. I really related to that aspect of it. And then finally, I brought it down because I wanted to talk about the last things we're reading. I reopened this book, this big bastard.
Right,
which is this Jack Kirby Mr. Miracle facsimile edition. You can go find these a lot of places. The facsimile editions, though, are... they come with a lot of the imperfections that they had before they went through the printing process.
Right.
So, like, you'll see tape marks and crossouts and shit like that. But, I mean, for me personally, it's not like, it's not this, oh, how dare, like this crappy talking head stuff Liefeld's talking about. But no, it's fun to see the process. Like, again, I make comics, I write comics. It's interesting to look at the process sometimes they had to go through back then. So what about you, man?
Let's see, what have I been reading? So Monstrous, of course. Catching up on Monstrous. I find that book utterly fascinating. It's kind of this steampunk fantasy. Survivors of a big war, right? Everyone you meet it's almost like D&D if everyone was just has this massive unresolved event where like a Godzilla level apocalypse happened, and like how does that affect each of us? What if the darkness is in all of us?
Right.
Wildly fascinating, really interesting presentation and art. They do a lot of almost manga-like cutaways to other characters. It's just really, it's creatively fulfilling on all levels. Immortal Hulk has been a fascinating read for me.
Immortal Hulk's amazing.
Yeah, fucking loving Immortal Hulk. Let's see. I just finished Paper Girls.
Ooh, nice.
Didn't finish exceptionally well, but that was just a fun world to spend time in.
Yeah.
Really, it's hard to wrap up any kind of time travel story, but it has this really nice, just moment with fucking friends at the end, man. That's what I was looking for out of that. Let's see, what else have I been reading? God damn it, I'm going to butcher the name, but it's called Kugari's Corpse Removal Service, I believe. It's a manga. And essentially it's this company, and they have to go. So they go and find a dead body, right? Suicide, natural causes, murder, whatever. And they help the spirit do whatever it needs so it can transition on. But that's manga. Manga's always out there for me, man. I love that shit.
That's always way out.
I'm trying to think. What's one more comic? Oh, Ascender just came out. So Ascender's fun because they take the massive sci-fi of Descender and say, what if all of that left? And now they're kind of rebooting with a fantasy tale. That just came out. Jeff Lemire, super fucking fun, man. That's it.
Yeah, man.
The problem I have, and this is why I think Liefeld's crazy, is every time I go to the comic shop, I can't keep up. And you know me, I'm about as free with money as a person can be who's not rich.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I will buy everything and anything, and I can't keep pace anymore. It's just all fun and tantalizing to me.
I'll say I haven't read them yet, but there are two books that I really, really, really need to get my hands on. They're both TKO books. One's the Jeff Lemire, Gabe Walta book, Sentient, which looks absolutely fascinating. It's literally about an AI that's being pursued by this separatist ship, and the AI in the ship is all they're built to do is protect these embryo children. So they literally have to evolve to protect these children from like imminent death than anything else, which is fascinating. I can't wait to read it. And then the other one is by one of my favorite writers right now, Roxane Gay, called The Banks, which is literally it's a heist story. That's all I know about it right now because I've tried to like the art's really interesting. It reminds me a lot of Dave Gibbons. So but those two books are like high on my list of things I have to read soon.
And when you read them, see if they're creative enough, if they're taking enough chances and moving the art form, because that's all we have to do now.
Yeah,
Rob Liefeld is the great mover of art.
Well, yeah. Hopefully it's
it's feet, unless it's fucking feet.
hopefully it's just giant tits, thongs, and pecs. Otherwise, I'm not going to understand anything. So.
Let's not be the show that stands in judgment of giant tits and pecs. I like those books too.
I don't stand in judgment of that. I stand in judgment of Liefeld.
You know the thing about Liefeld is he looks like the guy who would still be at the Creed concert. To bring all of my analogies together, that's how I picture him sitting there in judgment. So
he looks like the guy who still wants to go get VIP access to hang out with Scott Stapp. That's
right. I mean, to be fair, this is the most interesting time to talk to Scott Stapp. This is the time to get in.
Oh, God. Liefeld's also, like, totally not against, like, coming after people, so I have a feeling we might catch some heat for this. Yes.
He gonna send his minions.
Send your minions.
That's fine.
Guys, we hope you're having a good week. We certainly are. As always, catch us on all your social media conduits. If you listen to us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, hey, pause the show, rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend even. We have a lot of fun stuff coming up. We got a lot of good stuff. Then keep it paused, go to our other show, Film Alchemist, and rate, review, and subscribe to that one. We do a monthly curation. We got a very fun month coming up in February. I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. We're watching movies with the one fatal flaw in a love story. It's going to be a blast, guys. Trust me. We just got done doing Shake and Bacon month. All Kevin Bacon movies. We should just do all Kevin Bacon all year, really.
We should knock those out. Him and Nick Cage should be all the way cleared out before we move on.
Yeah, for sure. And then also, while you're at it, please like our YouTube channel, Nerd Alchemist. If you're watching on here right now, leave a review, whatever you must do. But thank you for watching as well. The views help, telling us how you feel. That's all I got. Griff, anything? Did I miss any plugs?
No, I'm fucking out. I hate all of this. No, I'm just kidding. This isn't the way it's always been.
From the Long Box Sessions, I'm Alex Dandino.
And I'm standing in judgment of Tits and Pecs.
Come at me, Liefeld. Come at me.
Be careful. Be careful, bro.